The Israelis seem to be particularly concerned about the possibility of some kind of missile launch from Iran itself, and they have indicated that they would retaliate if there was such a strike. So there's been this kind of a shadow war, tit for tat, going on between Hezbollah and Israel for some months now. I think the concern is that there may be some expansion, acceleration of those kinds of attacks.
The war in Gaza could escalate to a wider Middle East conflict. Gerald Michael Feierstein, or former U.S. ambassador to Yemen under President Barack Obama, is with us. And Gerald, you were also Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Near East Affairs, so you know this region well. Where do you think we're at the moment? Because the tension's being ratcheted up, isn't it?
Well, it's certainly concerning. There's no question that we've seen a series of very provocative moves on Israel's side, targeting Hezbollah, targeting senior Iranian IRGC, Quds Force leaders. And so it is a moment where there is a lot to be worried about.
Yeah, I see that. Administration officials in Washington and Biden administration, they say Iran is planning a, quote, larger than usual aerial attack on Israel in the coming days. What do you think this means, larger than usual?
Well, of course, Hezbollah has a lot of capabilities. They have a lot of missiles. They have a lot of drones. They have a lot of weapons that they could use. And certainly if you're launching attacks from Lebanon or from Syria, they could pretty much cover all of Israel. So that would be one possibility. The Israelis seem to be particularly concerned about the possibility of some kind of missile launch from Iran itself, and they have indicated that they would retaliate if there was such a strike. So there's been this kind of a shadow war, tit for tat, going on between Hezbollah and Israel for some months now. I think the concern is that there may be some expansion, acceleration of those kinds of attacks.
I was looking at the quote from the supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei, and he said, "When they attack the consulate, it is as if they attacked our soil. The evil regime made a mistake and must be punished, and it shall be." So given that statement, why are analysts so sure that Iran doesn't want to widen the war? Because that's what we're hearing from analysts here in this country and in the US.
Yes, and that's been the view from the early days of the Gaza conflict. The Iranians have been pretty clear. They've said it publicly. They have apparently said it privately to senior U.S. officials that they do not want to be drawn into this war right now. They've managed to keep Hezbollah pretty much out of it, except as I mentioned, there is this kind of tit for tat firing between Israel and southern Lebanon. When some of their proxies in Syria and Iraq hit a U.S. facility and killed some of our service people, they also were clear at that time that they were going to ensure that didn't get repeated, and since then it has not been. So they have done what they could do to try to make sure that nobody had any excuse or reason to come after them directly.
Mm-hmm. And is this because they fear if the U.S. or Israel decided so, they could hit Tehran, they could essentially bring that regime to an end?
Yeah, I don't know if they would bring the regime to an end, and I suspect that they wouldn't go, against Tehran itself, but they could certainly do a lot of damage to Iran's military infrastructure, to its missile and other capabilities, and conceivably even try to hit some of their nuclear sites. So I suspect that if there is retaliation against Iran, it would be more targeted against their military capabilities and civilian populations.
Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, the war in Gaza continues. Sorry, Gerald. Meanwhile, the war in Gaza continues, and all this excitement about a possible deal, well, it seems to have dissipated because everyone's worried about the possibility of a major conflict between Iran and Israel. What can we say about the negotiations now?
Well, they're going on. The two sides still seem to be fairly far apart in terms of what they're willing to accept and to offer. But I know that the U.S. along with the Qataris and the Egyptians are continuing to try to square the circle and put something on, excuse me, to put something on the table that both sides can accept. And in the meantime, of course, we continue to work very closely with the Israelis to try to manage whatever they may be thinking about in Rafah, and also to try to ease the humanitarian situation inside of Gaza. So, that's all out there. It's still being worked, but whether or not we're any closer to a resolution of that military conflict is unclear.
Yeah, I see the USAID chief, Samantha Power, has publicly said she agrees with a UN rapporteur that famine is now happening in northern Gaza. If you consider what President Biden has said in recent days, that Israel needs to allow more aid in, Benjamin Netanyahu is going about this the wrong way. There needs to be an immediate ceasefire. Meanwhile, Benjamin Netanyahu says, sorry, no, we're going into Rafah. What does that mean for Biden's influence over Tel Aviv? It sounds as though he's not being listened to. And now we hear him say, we've got an ironclad backing for Israel. He's all over the place.
Right. So, and that, I think, is part of the concern, is that the rhetoric coming out of the administration is pretty strong, including the interview that the president gave the other day, but even going back for some weeks or months, both the president and his senior officials have spoken pretty bluntly about their concerns about Israel's operations, about the humanitarian situation, about a number of issues, but they've yet to take a position that would, in fact, impose any kind of consequences, accountability on the Israelis for any of these things. And in the absence of doing that, they more or less have allowed Benjamin Netanyahu to go forward and do a number of things that are problematic for us, for the UK, for the entire international community.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the hostages, 130 Israeli hostages, were believed to still be in Gaza, being held, being detained. One doesn't know how many of them are alive.
Right.
If a majority of them are dead and it's confirmed, what do you think the Israeli War Cabinet's next move will be?
Well, up until now, in fairness, the hostages don't seem to have been at the top of the agenda for the Netanyahu government, and so that's part of the problem. And part of his domestic situation is that the families of the hostages are increasingly frustrated and angry that their government has not done more to prioritize getting the hostages home safely. And in the meantime, given the level of destruction and these military operations, some of them have clearly, unfortunately, died, and others are certainly in a very precarious position. So this is the situation. The Netanyahu government continues to insist that they're not going to stop these operations until they eliminate Hamas's military capabilities and its governing capabilities, even though most people think that those kinds of objectives are unachievable.
Yeah. And when Israeli officials say, we've been taking great care to avoid civilian casualties. We've warned them in advance. We've moved them to safe places. We've even put our own troops in harm's way. And the rate of civilian to combatant deaths in Gaza compares is much better than might have been seen in other conflicts, for example, in Iraq. What do you say to that?
Well,
yeah, you chuckle, General.
Yeah, I think that looking at it from the outside, it's hard to credit. We've got at least 13,000 children killed. Any number of women. And it all boils down at the end to who they regard as a combatant or as a member of Hamas, and whether what they consider to be one of the Hamas actors is what the rest of the world would think as well.
Does it sound to you like collective punishment? Does it feel like it?
Unfortunately, it does. It absolutely seems to be more focused on revenge and retribution than it does on any kind of military objective.
Okay. Gerald Michael Feierstein, thank you very much for your candor. And Gerald is former U.S. ambassador to Yemen under President Obama. He also was Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Near East Affairs.